Hey y'all, today I just want to make a quick video talking about doing handstands on parallettes, or basically with a neutral grip. Most people, when they try to learn how to do handstands, they obviously learn how to do them on their hands, but this is another option. And it's mainly an option for people like myself that have problems with their wrist. The reason I have an issue with my wrist is because when I first started learning handstands on my hands, I didn't learn how to bail properly, and I would always fall on my wrist violently, and I fractured something as a result. I never got it looked at. I'm not entirely sure, but it's never been the same since. So the only way I could consistently work on my handstands was to utilize a neutral grip. It was this thing where there's a will, there's a way. So I found handstanding on dumbbells, handstanding on parallettes, that worked out for me because I could train my handstand every day with the consistency that I needed to make progress. You're not going to make very much progress training handstands if you only do it every once in a while. It's just too complex of a movement to get it that way. So a lot of people see that and they ask me, well, is it easier or harder to do handstands on parallettes or on the ground? I've done both, so I think I can comment on this. And like most things in life, it depends. In my opinion, if you have weaker forearm wrist strength, you're probably going to find it a bit harder to balance on parallettes or with a neutral grip, because most of your balancing is going to come from your forearms and wrists doing this motion, as opposed to using your fingers when you're on the ground. So especially if you're somebody heavier and you need to balance a lot of mass, when you're learning, you're gonna need more strength, and that's gonna be harder on parallettes. So when you're starting out, you definitely want to try to learn how to handstand on the ground, but I definitely highly recommend everybody learn how to use a neutral grip or parallettes at some point, because it's going to make your hand balancing a lot more consistent by challenging your proprioception and your overall balance in different ways. So I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the challenges that people have, especially on parallettes that are a little bit higher. When you're on the ground, I'm not going to talk about kipping into a handstand or anything like that on the ground, because there's a million and one videos talking about that, and there's pitiful few talking about balancing on parallettes. So I'm just going to stick with that. But in relation to trying to balance on the ground, the biggest challenge people have is getting into the position, especially if the parallettes are higher like these. Right? So when you're trying to get into these guys, typically when you're on the ground, you want to have a straight body and you want to be able to kick up with a straight body. You want to be able to kick up and forward, right? But when you're trying to get into a position that you're higher than, you're going to need to be able to focus more on the vertical component. You're going to have to drive your foot up more. Make sure that your wrist shoulders are in alignment before you kip up, right? And then your arms are going to have no choice but to be bent. This is a big thing. When you're kipping onto the ground, you can make sure your arms are straight the entire time. And if the parallettes are higher than you, that's not going to be possible. Your arms are going to be bent at some position, so you're going to have to drive up to straighten your arms as you get your feet over your balance point. Shoulders and wrists in alignment. Drive up. Find your balance. Find your line and hold. And don't drop your keys. So, again, when you're trying to practice that balance, you're going to be doing this with your wrists, okay? To keep your body in alignment, as opposed to using your fingers when you're on your palms, okay? If you're using parallettes that are a little bit lower to the ground, then that can mimic being on your hands more. So if you have access to something like that, then you start there. But I like higher parallettes in general because if you're doing something like a handstand push-up, you can get a much larger range of motion using higher parallettes. So that's why I stick with higher parallettes, but I also have a pair of smaller ones. Hey, this is just a start, by the way. I want to do a lot more videos talking about balancing on parallettes, something more in depth in the future. I just wanted to get something out there because, again, when I was trying to learn how to hand balance on parallettes, there was like no resources. I think I found maybe one video on YouTube by Gabo Saturno is his name. Follow him. He's great if you don't. But I think he briefly talked about it in one of his handstand tutorials several years ago. And I haven't really seen anything since. And doing handstand, you can pretty much do anything you could do on your palms, balancing on your palms on parallettes, but it's a bit different in terms of balance. So I think there really needs to be more content in this area. So I'm going to try to see if I can provide that. Take it easy. Peace.